Welcome to the Career Meets World podcast, Matteo. It is such an honor to have you on today. Look, we have a ton to cover as always, and I want to make sure that our listeners really get to know Matteo and understand how you got to building the world's leading sleep company. And really, we'll dive into that in a second. But I want to make sure that we start off with just giving quick background on who you are. And again, thanks so much for joining.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm an open book. Ask me anything. I'll be happy to share.
Love it. So Matteo, I know early on in your career, you clearly weren't going down the pathway of building anything related to sleep fitness or the sleep world. And I want our listeners to understand where you came from, what your upbringing was like, because it really paints an incredible narrative of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I mean, the early career, I had a quite different or unique trajectory, right? So I started as a lawyer first in two very large law firms. Then I got into energy, solar energy, for climate change, and then I got into sleep. But the reason why I got into sleep, it goes back to my early days when I was a teenager. I was an athlete at the time. I was playing tennis tournaments. Before that, I used to do also ski races. My dad has been a skier. And then I also got into motorsport because my dad has been in motorsport, 2 times Italian champion. And so when I was a kid, I was going to the tracks with him. So I raced with cars and go-karts quite a bit. So I have always been an athlete and I have always been into performance, recovery, all that kind of thing. And so at a certain point in my career, I started wondering, so why Elon Musk is taking me to Mars, but I still spend a third of my life on a piece of dumb foam, hoping to wake up fully recovered. And when I understood that there were no solutions, but there could be solutions, that is when everything clicked for me.
I love that. And I know being a lawyer must be quite difficult in terms of sleep demand in general. I think early on in your career, especially in those hyper demanding areas that you worked in, whether it was being a lawyer or in the solar energy space, what do you think really helped you understand sleep during those moments? Because those are demanding jobs and they're not easy. And it's not necessarily something that most people are equipped to do or even train in school to prepare yourself mentally for that moment.
Yeah, so actually the way they pushed me, I started wondering, why do I have to sleep 8 hours, right? I was trying to be more efficient and to see if I could sleep less while maintaining a good health and no fitness level. And so I started looking at a lot of medical papers, and there is where I started developing my hypothesis that we need 8 hours just because our bodies are inefficient. Nothing changed since 3,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. No, originally human beings were sleeping on rock, and then they started sleeping on some sort of beds that didn't change until today. But no, we don't do anything to help ourselves to recover faster. And so we just we just took as an assumption that we need to sleep 8 hours. Well, instead of 8 sleep, we believe we can compress sleep.
So what did you learn in that time frame, right? You're doing a lot of research and understanding that so many of these legacy methodologies just don't work. There's been no evolution really with how we approach sleep. What did you learn in your early days when you started actually doing the research for 8 sleep?
Yeah, I always like to use a metaphor, right? And it's like saying, okay, let's make the example of New York. Okay, you're in Manhattan and you need to go to Brooklyn. And you just assume that going to Brooklyn, it takes you 5 hours because it's the time that it takes you to walk from Flatiron to Brooklyn. And no, for 4,000 years, human beings, they think that from Manhattan to Brooklyn, it takes 4 hours. And then you discover that you could take the subway or you could take an Uber and it would take you 30 minutes. that is the example.
No, I love that. I think if you think about like just in general personal GPS systems today, right? That's what we're trying to get towards as well with sleep. And I'd really love to learn those early days of 8 sleep because it's really easy to look at a company and say, okay, everyone knows what 8 sleep is. Clearly, you're in a growth stage right now. But the early days are what's really fun about a startup. Can you highlight or even share a story of some of those early days when you might have kind of even pre-YC? What was happening? What was going through your head at that time?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of interesting things. So the first one is how everything really started. So Max and I, we developed the first prototype in his garage. Max built it. We developed the idea together, but I was more already on the business side. So what we did was we organized a pajama party, and we invited, I think, 5 friends. We involved Alexandra to create a sort of small presentations that we could show on an iPad, and people just tested the product at the time. That was similar but different from what we have today. And at the end of this pajama party, one of our friends, he gave us a 25K check. At the time, there was no company, there was nothing, and it was more a side project for Max and I than anything else. We have been working on side projects for probably 6 months before I sleep, Max and I, also with Alexandra. So we work on a bunch of stuff. And that is how everything started. So he wanted to give us the 25K check. So at that point, we finally incorporated and we had the money to kick off.
That's awesome. So what do you do with that first 25K, right? Because that's not a whole lot of money, especially when you're designing an intelligent mattress and it's labor intensive, capital intensive. What would somebody do with that $25,000 check?
I think that was the first validation. And from there, we raised almost $1 million from family and friends. But the first thing we did is we incorporated the company. So we paid the lawyers. Yeah, I mean, from there, we started believing in the project. So we started working on a crowdfunding campaign. At the time, crowdfunding was a pretty big deal. It was the hype of Indiegogo and Kickstarter. And so we started working on that. So I think that was probably around a June timeframe. And in February of the following year is when we would launch the crowdfunding campaign that then would sell around 8,000 units in pre-orders.
Wow, incredible. And I do want to jump back into sleep in just a second, but I want to ask, because it's so important, especially for our listeners, to understand your background is dynamic, right? You worked as a lawyer, you worked in the solar energy space, and then you jumped into sleep. What do you think that those experiences really taught you and helped you in your early days as you were starting your company?
I think what I have learned, there are another couple of factors, right? I was not really speaking English until when I was probably 20. At the time, as a young athlete, I was not even spending too much time really connected or looking at technology or kind of, things. And so if you play the odds I had at the time to become a tech entrepreneur in the United States while I was in Italy, born and raised in a small city with a castle from 900 and the walls, to the chances of being where I am today is extremely unlikely. And I think if I look back at my career, one thing I'm proud of is that almost every X years, I have been able to almost reinvent myself in a new direction that was completely unexpected. And probably that goes back to my character because I get bored easily. And I'm almost demanding, kind of always demanding with myself and the team. So I always try to challenge myself in new directions. And so this is what I have learned, right? I started as a lawyer. So I started studying law because my dad was a lawyer, my sister is a lawyer, so it was just the most obvious choice. Then from there, I challenged myself to go to these big law firms that are really some of the largest in the world. They're called the Magic Circle in UK. It was really hard to get in, even because I had no contacts at all. And then from there, I became an entrepreneur, which I didn't really know what an entrepreneur was until when I did it. And then from there, we opened the US with that company. It would have been almost impossible for me to come to the US because of the visa, but because of the company, I started the process. And then as I was selling that company is when I really started getting into technology and developing the network. So
yeah, it's definitely a challenge, especially for anybody immigrating to the States. You need a purpose to come here or a little bit of luck or family, right? It's not the easiest journey for a lot of people. And there's a misconception that the pathway for immigrants is so easy here, but it's quite the opposite. And you were able to take that and turn it into continuous opportunities. You and me both. I get bored quite easily, and I want to make sure that I'm always challenging myself. So, as you continue to build Eight Sleep and you're expanding now, and I think the company has good traction. You just recently raised money from SoftBank, which creates new interesting demands and challenges. What's really next for you on the horizon for the next 12 to 24 months?
Couple of things. I mean, there is growth, right? So I'm really excited about where we are going. None of my previous companies reached this stage, and so I'm really learning something new. And the other side what I'm really excited about is our product, right? I mean, we really want to save lives. We want to compress your sleep and save lives. So in 2-3 years from now, we might be able to detect a bunch of illnesses that could save lives. And so to me, it's the closest thing we could get to a doctor in terms of value for humanity and value in terms of legacy for my existence as a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've heard this multiple times from you, and I really want to make sure that our listeners and personally, I understand even more what that looks like. What does saving lives mean during sleep?
Yeah, so I mean, there will be a time in the next few years where we will be able to scan your body. My goal is to be able to detect cancer, but there will be way more than that, right? We will be able to monitor how you're aging, and so your longevity, detecting cancer, looking at your bones, so osteoporosis. We could look at fat percentages. We could look at ligaments and tendons. If you have anything there that maybe is irritated or you have any inflammation. So imagine going to the doctor for an MRI. Obviously, it wouldn't be an MRI technology because you cannot do X-rays every day, but it's that type of experience. We don't expect to replace the doctors, but we expect to provide the doctors with 120% of the data that they need, then be able to save your life. I think the dream for machine learning and AI in this field is to be able to tell you, look, you have 80% likelihood to develop this illness within 3 years. I don't even want to get to day one because it's too late. I want to tell you, look, change your nutrition today. Otherwise, you have this likelihood to develop this disease in X years from now.
Yeah, it's so important to focus on preventative health and the current healthcare system, which often I like to refer to as sick care. But that being said, I think with the Eight Sleep, it's quite the innovative technology that oftentimes is a misconception. And you're famously known for saying that it's a piece of dumb foam. How does the technology work without giving away too much? Just more so, what is it actually doing while you're sleeping? And how does it help you actually sleep better?
Yeah, so the way it helps you sleep better is through temperature, right? So your body temperature changes during the night, and there is plenty of medical evidence that temperature has a huge impact on your sleep and the quality of your sleep. And so because there are also sensors embedded in our technology, based on your sensors and your preferences, we can adjust temperature multiple times during the night to maximize your sleep. So what we see is people fall asleep faster, people get more deep sleep, and they get less toss and turns and less wake ups. So the bottom line is through temperature, we give you more restful sleep, which means more energy, healthier life, a more energetic and healthier life. The other key thing is because we have all these sensors, there is a second dimension that is the preventative health. Right now, the focus is mainly on heart rate, which means also HRV, which is a proxy of how recovered you are every day, respiratory rate. So in the near future, we'll be able to see snoring and sleep apnea. And then there is sleep in general, where we can tell you how recovered you are, how much you slept, how many times did you toss and turns and you woke up, and we can coach you to improve each of them.
Yeah, I think my wife will definitely appreciate the sleep snoring aspect of it, but we'll leave it at that. I think the other big piece that I'd love to understand is what you personally do before you even sleep, right? I think Eight Sleep is an incredible product, but it's only a piece of the solution in terms of your health cycle. And I think what we do before we go to sleep is so imperative. So can you share a little bit about your personal routine as well?
Yeah, I mean, the more time I spend in health, the more I geek out about that. So I try to take care of my nutrition, my fitness, and my sleep. In terms of nutrition, I have been on a keto diet for a couple of years now. I fast every day, so usually during the week I eat only once a day. In the weekends I eat twice a day. Then in terms of fitness, I try to train somewhere between 5 and 7 times a week. I play tennis because I really like tennis and do a lot of sports. Otherwise, I do high intensity interval training, which is supposed to be the best thing for your cardio, and some weight training. And then in terms of sleep, I mean, a lot of things. There are some things I call it thermal shock. So you could do it with a shower where you keep switching between really hot and really cold 10 times, 30 seconds each. Or if you have a sauna or an ice bath, like for example, when you travel in hotels, you can do with that. So that really shakes your body and it helps you to relax. The
Also
other thing
helps with inflammation, right?
also helps with inflammation. The cold plunge is supposed to be one of the greatest things that you can do for your body and for inflammation. The other thing I do is I mean my lights change at home. Around 7:30 they switch to orange, and then they keep dimming down every 30 minutes. I do a bunch of mobility or stretching exercises. And then obviously there is the whole temperature setup of my bed and my bedroom that are really important, together with light blocking and noise blocking.
That's incredible. And obviously that's a lot to ingest if you're not somebody that's close to that point, but I know it took you time to get there. I don't think the average lawyer is in that type of mental state to actually be doing all of
Yeah.
these things. I'm curious also, do you practice any sort of meditation?
Yeah, it's probably the area where I struggle the most if I think of the health ecosystem. I tried a bunch, Headspace, Calm. One thing I do that usually works well for me is you wake up and you spend the first 30 minutes or 60 minutes just thinking. Maybe I have a tea or a coffee, and you just don't read the news, you don't do anything. That works well for me, but sometimes I'm still a bit nervous and I just want to jump into things. And so then I don't do that. So I keep having on and off moments for that.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to integrate with the amount of information that we have today, especially with just bombardment from different directions. With that being said, I'm also really the last question I want to ask you right now is, as you go into this next phase of growth, I think having this major demand from the market, everything is shifting. There's more growth in Miami right now. What actually keeps you up at night?
So the answer I always give that is the most obvious is there are three things: it's hiring, it's growth, and product. Right? Those are the three key dimensions. And obviously, hiring is the foundation of everything, because if you hire the right people, then they will figure it out and everything will happen. If you screw up hiring, it's unlikely that the other two things happen. But yeah, you can put all of them together. I think the other one is obviously now as the company grows and you reach product market fit, you understand that you're sitting on a big opportunity. It becomes in soccer terms almost a penalty kick. And so the pressure goes up even when you raise, and not because external people put you directly that pressure, but for people that know they want to change the world and they have ambitious goals. It's part of the game. You get closer, but then as you get closer, then you need to nail it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that analogy, and it's so important for any aspect of life that the closer you get to the goal, the stakes go up and the pressures go up. And I think in general, sleep is such an important piece of our life, right? I think if you think about just the cost comparisons, and let's talk about this in terms of aid sleep, because people will spend 30, 50, $60,000 on a Tesla, especially for a car, and they use it for 10 years. Well, most people use a mattress for 10 years as well. And you spend a third of your life sleeping. So how do you get people over the mental barrier to make the investment in such an important piece of their lifestyle?
Yeah, it's part of education. It's not something that happens overnight, and you need to be able to prove in a quantitative way how much you improve it. If you could just say, look, I mean, use this product and I'm going to improve your deep sleep by 20%, I think it will be a pretty easy and obvious sell to a lot of people, right? As long as they can afford it and as long as they're already health conscious, which is a pretty large audience. The key is to really be quantitative and prove that your product delivers what you promise.
So what can you tell our listeners in terms of what 8 Sleep actually delivers and essentially why everyone should be using this mattress? I know it's something that I intend to invest in this year, but I'm curious for you, what's your big messaging to people?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, the first suggestion is just go on Twitter and see how many people are raving about that. So it's not even me pitching you, but it's them telling you about their experience. These are all real people, no affiliation with the company. They just love it, dozens and dozens per day. But what our data says is you fall asleep around 15% faster. You can get 20 to 40% more deep sleep. And this is not reported by us, but reported by devices like Aura or Whoop. So there is plenty of these, people showing that their Whoop or Aura data improve by these amounts after using the pod. You get 30 to 40% less toss and turns, 30 to 40% less wake ups. So the impact is meaningful. On top of these, so on top of the public reviews, on top of our data, then there is also medical evidence. So independent studies that have been run way before we even existed that prove that temperature is the big elephant in the room in terms of sleep and improvement.
Hey, this is not the first place most people will hear this, but you're absolutely right. Twitter is the best place to get any sort of open air testimonials from prominent people. But I too love everything that you put out there because it's just factual. That's the beautiful thing about it. There's no upselling or brand marketing. It's really just about the fact the product makes sense and it helps people gain a lot of energy throughout the day, which is, let's say, probably the thing that people need the most right now. Look, Matteo, I really enjoy this conversation. Before we let every single one of our guests off the hook, we always put them through the hot seat, and we're going to ask you some personalized questions right now. So are you ready?
Do it. Let's rock and roll.
All right. So I'm going to ask you 3 specific questions. I know that you are still an avid tennis player. You're a huge tennis fan, as am I. I have to ask you, who is your top female tennis player and top male tennis player of all time that you love?
Yeah, I think for female is Naomi Osaka. I really like what she's doing. On the male side, I mean, obviously, the Federer of the world is obviously obvious. I mean, Federer is one of the greatest. I really like Nadal because he has now that grit, that he's a fighter and is the type of culture in general I like. So probably Nadal.
Okay, love it. Also a lefty, so it makes him a little bit more unique.
Okay.
Second question for you, and I ask this of everyone. If you and I were to take a jet plane right now to New York City, we go to Times Square, you have unlimited budget, what would you smear up all over the wall, all across the billboards in Times Square?
Sleep is fitness. Yeah, that is our tagline. And so I would have the big 8 Sleep logo and then say, I would write Sleep is fitness.
Love it. That's the goal for you next. Final question for you. If you had to read one book for the rest of the time, you couldn't read anything else, what would that book be?
It obviously depends, right? I would have to optimize for one or other things. There is the Almanac of Naval Ravikant that I think it gives you a lot of frameworks of how you can think of life. So I would probably pick that. If I was picking a biography, it would be Shoe Dog from Nike. I think it's a great story. And if it was about sleep, it would be Why We Sleep.
All great books. Definitely will include those in the show notes. Really appreciate that. Matteo, I know you hang out on Twitter a lot, but where else can our listeners find you? Is it Twitter and 8 Sleep?
Yeah, so I'm really on Twitter to find my contact details there. You could just go on 8sleep.com, so our homepage, 8 like the number, but just in letter, so EIGHT sleep.com, and there you can see all the details of how you find me on Twitter, and yeah, you will see me there pretty active.
Awesome. We'll definitely make sure we share those with everyone. Matteo, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate it. I know how important sleep is. It's something that I personally have been investing in more and more, just learning more about it. Why We Sleep by Matt Walker is such a powerful book and will fundamentally inspire people to change their lives and understand why 8 Sleep can be a big part of it. So thank you so much. And as we always say at Career Meets World, go unleash your wildest potential. Thanks so much.
Thank you.